Hi, everybody. Welcome to Miami Lit Podcast. My name is Jenny.
And I'm Gene.
Thank you for joining us today. Today we have an interesting episode. We want to discuss a big question we've both been thinking about for quite some time. So, is socialism a threat to the United States?
So, I guess it's it's a curious question, because there's a lot to unpack in that question. Especially like, how did you even word it? Is socialism a threat to America? Right, not communism. Right.
Right.
Is socialism a threat?
Yeah,
to
because
America?
I think it's safe to say we're not dealing with communism right now, right?
Oof. Okay. So big. That's I guess like to clarify. What's the difference between socialism and communism? Like, do you think? Like, do you think there's even a difference? Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. In my personal view, no. I think it's, to quote Shakespeare, a rose by any other name will smell as sweet. I think it's two sides of the same coin, but I know that technically there are differences, or there are differences to be claimed.
I mean, what are the technical differences, you think?
Well, socialism, right? The biggest basis is they're here for social support, right? The social construct. So, whereas communism, it's more about taking care of everything as a whole, the community.
Yeah.
But you let me know, since you're the expert.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. But it's for me to be an expert, in my opinion, for you to be an expert on communism itself. I feel like this isn't enough. Like the Communist Manifesto,
Right?
It's like everyone's read the Communist Manifesto,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the one that everyone goes to. The only thing we have to lose are our chains, right?
Yes.
But no one has ever read Das Kapital.
I haven't.
Yeah, I haven't either. Nobody has. I think I've met like 2 people in my life who have ever read Das Kapital, and they taught it. So that's like
So they really know it.
Yeah, so they really know it, because Das Kapital is the actual economics book.
Mm-hmm.
So while the Communist Manifesto is like the ideas and motivations behind it, right? So like the master-slave dialectic, the Hegelian master-slave dialectic, the critical theory aspect of it, the historical materialism, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, right? Seizing the means of production, right? That's all in the Communist Manifesto. But how do you make that work economically? Like, what are your economic theories? So it's like you're sitting in an economics class, right? So there's different economic theories. Das Kapital actually has those economic theories. So it talks about currency, it talks about valuations, it talks about commodities. So it's an economics theory book, and that's the one that no one's read, because for one, it's boring, and 2, it's really, really hard.
I can imagine.
And so to do that, right? To do that actual communism in practice, right? I feel like that's where it gets with socialism, why they're both sides of the same coin, right? Mm-hmm. Because if communism is the idea of seizing the means of production,
right,
whatever the hell that means, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, what is the means of production, right? It's for Marx, it's the materials around us, right? Mm-hmm. It's the resources that we have available to us, right? So seizing that is what's going to cause the communist revolution, right? Which is where our normal conceptions of value are gone, and wealth is essentially redistributed to everybody, right? So our entire conceptions of economic competition are gone, right? And then all of the problems that brings, right? Yeah. At least that's their idea, that they're problems in the first place. Capitalists embrace these problems, right?
Yes.
Communists say that no, they're problems that need to be dealt with, right? So, but here's the iffy part in this is like where communism has always seemed to fail, which is putting it into practice. Because that idea is always there, but putting it into practice, how do you do it? How do you seize the means of production? Marx paints this pretty picture of, it's going to happen on its own, right? He has this idea of that history is progressing in a direction, right? And then the end goal would be like the end of capitalism and
right, this utopian community where we all share and everyone's happy.
Exactly. But how do we get there? So then
we don't, because any idea, any establishment, anything that promises you that as humans we're going to end up in this happy, perfect state, I don't trust it. It's a lie. It's impossible. We are complex beings. It's never going to be that way. Ever.
And that's what makes socialism a really interesting thing, because Lenin knew that. And he, instead of trying to modify the Marxian idea, he sort of tried to make it a reality. Right. But that's the ugly truth of communism, is that the only way to put it into practice is through socialism, which is the government seizing the means of production, right? Because who else is going to do it? It's going to have to be the government. And so when the government seizes the means of production, so in practice, what did that mean, right? Well, so far how we see is that they literally seize all of the assets that the nation has. So we can just go, I don't think we have to, but we can go through all of the countries and we can specify, okay, what does that even mean, right?
Exactly.
It's like Venezuela, they took over everything, right? They took over all the businesses, all of the oil, all of the natural resources. That's just what happens in every single socialist state. There's no free market, essentially. There's no such thing as a free market. And that's that's the cost supposedly for this utopia.
Right.
You lose your freedom.
It's a big cost.
It's a big cost.
In my opinion.
No, it's I think it's like objectively a big cost.
Yeah.
Because socialism is always related to some form of atrocity to human rights.
And I think what people take from it, what it appeals to people, is this idea that the government will be able to take care of big social issues that we cannot take care of on an individual basis. And I think that's the part that most people really enjoy about this idea. Does that make sense?
No, can you explain that?
From what I've seen, the people that I've spoken to while I'm in the classroom or whatever, excuse me, what appeals to people is this idea that, for example, poverty, right? People who live in extreme poverty. You and I, as individuals, can't really rectify that issue in our society. But if we allow the government to create social programs and take care of our social issues like extreme poverty, healthcare issues, then those issues will be fixed and they won't exist in our society.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people like about it. And it sounds great. I mean, no one wants their society to have extreme poverty or to have people deal with healthcare issues or anything of that nature. But I think there's a lot left there's a lot lost in translation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people that are in favor of socialism usually bring up the arguments that, for example, in American history, socialism, social programs have been in place in United States history in dire situations. Like the most famous one that's often quoted is the New Deal by FDR, right? So during the Great Depression, the federal governments had to take control of the market and influence it and create social programs, right? So that's the New Deal. And then, so welfare programs, what are these construction programs, right? All of these, Social Security, right? Part of it, right? That we still have, right? Yeah. It's like a good 30% of our budget, or maybe 15 to 20, depending on depending on the president, of course.
Right.
But the point is that, all right, they like to quote that, right? So they like to quote that in our American history, we have social programs, right? And it's like, well, the government has taken control of education, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is an argument that it's like,
It's
well, is that a good thing or not?
yeah.
You know, but the point is that it's free, right? Some states, for example, Massachusetts was the first one to have like, you know, a healthcare system, right? That Obama basically modeled Obamacare after
Mm-hmm.
that. You know, thank you, Romney, right? So it's weird, right? He's he's a Republican, right? And
Right.
it was during his government when he was governor. So there are social programs, right? The post office,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the government is involved in these things, right? So that's where people start to say, well, you see, socialism isn't a bad thing.
It works.
It works there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But is that really what we're talking about when we say socialism?
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't.
That's what I mean when I say there's a lot left. There's a lot lost in translation when we say, but they take care of our social, issues, and they help with all these social programs. What about the rest of it?
Yeah, the ugly
Yeah.
side of it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's we can talk about a spectrum, right? How socialist or how communist is a state, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the more they get to that socialist communist part, the worse off that country seems to be, both economically and with human rights violations,
Mm-hmm.
right? So look at the first one, Russia,
Yeah.
right? When it became the Soviet Union, the the Stalin killed more people, arguably speaking, and it's even harder to tell because the numbers just changed because they did such a poor they weren't like the
Right.
Nazis where they calculated and they
Yeah.
counted every single person they killed. They just were, all right, you're like an enemy, and without any proof, send you to the gulags,
Mm-hmm.
right? So arguably Stalin killed more people than Hitler did during the communist era, during his rule of the Soviet Union, right? He ruled that country with an iron fist, and it was bloodshed,
Yeah.
absolute bloodshed. And so everywhere that system has followed, it's just led to more human rights violations and loss of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And the country suffers economically for it too. So the people end up being poor. The people end up more desperate than where
Yeah.
they were before. And that's the weird thing. Communism and socialism sort of feeds off of that desperation to begin with, right?
Right. Yeah, and it seems like they both end up with the same result: a complete degradation of society, culture, and just the human spirit.
Yeah, like I mean, you have firsthand experience with it, right?
Yeah. So I was born in Cuba. I was raised here, but I was born in Cuba. Obviously, we all know Cuba is a communist country. Um, and the big argument is, well, the United States will never become a Cuba, but Cuba would say the same thing. Cuba would never become a Russia. They all said it. Um, and look at what happened. We did become a Russia in a sense, maybe even more successful than Russia, right? Because they're still there. So my experience with it, it's very much like you described. There's a complete loss of freedom. The government controls everything. What you read, what you learn, even who you speak to is controlled. Who you associate with, people's freedoms are completely removed. There was a time, I don't believe that's in place right now, but in the 90s, there was a time when your electricity was rationed. So a couple of times a week, you would not have any electricity for 12 hours a day. So those are just, little snippets. And then, of course, my family comes from, half of my family, my grandfather was, what's the word I'm looking for? He was involved in anti-Castro movements, so he was in jail. And we have a very specific last name, which no one else in the country had, so it's kind of known who we were.
What's your the last name?
Poviones.
Poviones.
Yeah. So, when my mom went to school and her siblings went to school, they were harassed by adults, not just children, like fellow teachers. Anybody in that setting for having that last name, for being anti-government. I, in a way, also dealt with it. I remember my parents having to do certain extra things to make sure that my teachers wouldn't question me all the time, like, where's your grandfather? Or, when my dad came to the United States, it was, where's your father? Why isn't your father here? Make sure that I would, like, give my allegiance in the morning to the flag. Very twisted, weird stuff for, a 5-6-year-old to experience.
Well, I guess I'm curious. What made that last name so special, and why didn't anybody else have it?
Oh, okay. That's a different, like, a history lesson. It's like the Spanish version of an Italian last name, and we don't know because the birth records are messed up, so we don't know exactly how my family ended up in Cuba. But that's why no one else has that last name. So we're kind of...
Oh, so that's cool. So then that last name was also associated, since it was so rare.
Mm-hmm.
So it was also...
So it's kind of like you can't escape it. You know what I mean? It's not like Rodriguez that you could be like, well, I don't know that person. But when you wrote your name down, they know. Like, you're all related. You're all the same.
Yeah, anti-communist, anti-Castro.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys were... I mean, it's cool from my perspective, right? But from yours,
right.
It's I'm sure it must have been hard.
It was definitely difficult growing up because you knew that you were, you didn't belong. You were othered. And it was great because you don't want to belong to that hot mess. But it was difficult, knowing that you live in a place where everything is wrong. Because at the same time, I was taught very early that, this is not the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to have freedoms. You're supposed to be able to say what you think without legal repercussions. You're supposed to be able to grow as a person, go to school, have your choice in profession, things like that, which all those basic things are non-existent.
Yeah. And the way Castro came into power, so like he and Che and his brother Raul, right? They're fucking animals, those people, right? the amount of people they killed, the way they killed them, right? And it was he came the Cuban Revolution is actually a pretty cool like section in history, right? And Cuba is extremely important for like human history in general, right? Like we were talking about the other day. It's like you brought up that Cuba brought the world to its knees. Mm-hmm. Right, from the Cuban Missile Crisis.
It's crazy. A tiny little island that, pretty much shouldn't have any say in anything that goes on, made the world stop for a little bit. Yeah. So when people say, like, well, communism is not that bad, well, it really doesn't affect us. It does.
No, definitely. Like, that little, for us, it's 90 miles away, right?
Yeah.
And it was with the Cuban Missile Crisis, they brought nuclear weapons 90 miles away from United States soil. Yes. Right? When you look back in like documentaries or read books or like watch shows that take place in that time, right? It's like they thought the world was gonna end, and they lived it way too. That's why.
And it could have.
And it could have.
Yeah.
It really could have.
It could have.
If it wasn't, I think it was like a general, right, that gave the order. He disobeyed the order.
Yes.
Right? He disobeyed it was a Russian soldier, right? He disobeyed the order, right? It was so the world could have ended right there, right? And at least like the world when Castro took over, like the world for like the Cuban people, like their way of life ended too.
Yes. Yeah. Pre-Castro, obviously every government has its issues. That's why it's a government, I would say. It goes without saying. But before Castro, Cuba had a flourishing economy, basic freedoms for its people. You were allowed to travel. I remember hearing stories of family members that would come to Miami for the weekend, and they would vacation here and just go back Sunday afternoon, and it was, very open. It was a flourishing place. And Castro comes in, everything gets shut down, businesses are closed, you have no way of making ends meet. All you could do is work for the government, and then we start to see a degradation of society and culture.
Yeah, like my Cuban friends always talk about how their families are without food. They have to send money from here to over there so their family can eat. And sometimes they don't have regular access to internet the way that we do. Like it's monitored, right?
Right.
It's not as bad as China, right? China
Right.
just has its own internet completely, which the government there regulates it too completely. It's not like here.
Which was interesting because when that happened, when Cuba opened up, I thought, why that sudden shift? But then you realize what they're after. They're after tourism and selling this nice postcard, this nostalgia with the Chevys and the old Spanish buildings, this like moment in time that just froze. So it's convenient to them to open up just a little bit and, show you like, oh, this is how amazing everything is. Everyone here is so nice. And we're just having such a good time with our coffee and tobaccos. But that's not reality.
Yeah, the people are hungry, and
people are hungry in every sense of the word, not just physically. Mentally, emotionally, intellectually. There's nothing left because it's been so many years, and they have complete control of the education. So you're educated, and you hear the argument, well, like Cuban doctors are amazing, and okay, it's true. But unless you choose to be a doctor, you can't choose to be a business person. You can't choose to be an entrepreneur or anything of that nature. There are like 3 professions that they're willing to send you to school for. And that's to be a doctor, to be an economist, and I forgot the third one. But it's basically what they want you to do. It's never what you want to do.
Yeah, it's probably like a lawyer or something like that.
No, not even, because the laws are...
completely controlled.
Yeah.
And it's like the argument of like Cuban doctors. It's like I find that weird because what makes them great isn't that they have like all of this advanced medicine or anything, but it's the fact that they're able to adapt to different situations in times of desperation.
Right.
Like I remember when Hurricane Katrina happened and Castro offered Bush Cuban doctors and Bush turned her down, right? He turned Castro down.
I believe so.
He turned him down, and that was like really controversial at the time because what makes Cuban doctors really good, what makes them really good doctors is that they're able to adapt because they have so little. It's not the fact that they have all this great medicine. It's that
they don't have this technology and medicine at their disposal.
Yeah, no, they have to make things up on the spot, right?
Yeah.
They have to make what do you call it? They make they just make things out of what they have, but it's out of desperation.
Yeah, they have to innovate and save lives no matter what.
Improvise.
There's no, I don't have this tool. It has to happen.
Yeah, it's coming from a negative place. It's not coming out of that they're supported in that way. It's if anything, that's what that's like the Cuban pride, right? That's like the thing with Cuban people.
Oh, teachers. That was the third profession. I remembered. Teachers. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So you gotta indoctrinate people, right?
Exactly.
So you gotta take care of people. You have your doctors. You have to, make sure you're controlling the numbers because you have to keep a hold of whatever economical facade you have created, and you have to indoctrinate people.
Of course.
So it's very interesting that those 3 professions are the ones that get pushed down on people the most.
Yeah, and Cuba's just one example of like socialism and communism, right? Like the other famous Latin America example was Venezuela.
Yes.
Right. And then what happened there? Chavez was a complete disaster, right? And Venezuela has been a disaster ever since.
Yeah.
My Venezuelan friends, they talk about how they have to leave, right?
Yeah,
and
there's so much bloodshed.
Yeah. So like what Cubans have to do to get here, you guys have Cubans have to cross the sea, shark-infested waters with like rafts made out of like cars and like, made out of just whatever, just to get here. And it's like, it brings me so much curiosity of why people want that here in America. Because look at what Cubans and Venezuelans have to do to get away from it. Like Cubans would rather risk their lives and their families' lives with these impromptu, basically, you can't even call them. Yeah, you can't call them boats even.
Yeah.
to cross.
My dad was one of those. Yeah, he
Oh.
was lucky. He had an actual boat, if we can call it that. It was military raft, I think. That I'm not quite sure on the, but yeah, it was crazy. So
Yeah, you told me like the Coast Guard.
yeah, a Navy, U.S. Navy, rescued them, which was great. So we're lucky because we have footage of them being rescued, and you know the amazing people that received them, and they were so helpful. Unfortunately, that boat has already been decommissioned, so we can't like pay our respects. But we have pictures and videos, and it was great historical moment because my father and the men that he came with were one of the first to try to to do that in the early 90s. So I'm super grateful, you know,
That's
for
awesome.
yeah, for that sacrifice because otherwise my life would be completely different. But it's communism is very real and it affects everybody.
Yeah, and it's like, your family, like Cubans in general, what they do to get here,
Hmm.
right? To escape it. Why do you think people want it here?
Because this is the land of opportunity, right?
Well, what I mean by the question is, why do you think there are people in this country
Oh,
that
I see
want
what you're saying.
that
That
want
would
communism?
want,
Hmm.
well, they won't say they want communism. They'll say they want socialism, and they claim that that's somewhat different. But I think it's, the our country right now it's experiencing such divisiveness. Which, if you look at all these countries where communism was able to come into, that's exactly how it started. You know, you divide the people and you start to say, well, we need a community. We need to be together. To bring it back to Cuba for a second. In Cuba, we're a big melting pot. You have Jewish community, Chinese community, um, Italians. You have all sorts of people that fall under the Cuban umbrella. And it was one of those where everyone was kept separate and you don't get involved. You don't get involved with what goes on in the Chinese community and you don't get involved with what goes on with the Italians. They kind of like take care of themselves. And that's a easy way for the government to come in and perpetuate that divisiveness to then take it back to their advantage. So to bring it back to your question, I think, the fact that they're claiming that we're so divided, it's a way that socialism kind of, it's a band-aid, let's bring it back together. Let's all, fight for what we all care about. We're all people. We all deserve healthcare. We all deserve education. We all need to be taken care of. When that's not true, I think that if you bring it back to the individual and you reinforce the power of the individual, then the group grows.
Yeah, and like that divisiveness that you're talking about, like separate, like this tribalism. Like Cuba's a really good example for that too, because when people, I want to talk about Scandinavia, like the Norwegian countries in a little bit, right? Because that's the model that the socialists here they want to model that one. They say, well, Cuba and Venezuela, they're bad.
Yeah, they're failed experiments.
Yeah, and like we're not trying to be like the Soviet Union. We're trying to be like Scandinavia, right? We want to be those countries. But it's kind of like, before we can talk about that, it's like, well, why do we want it here in the first place, right? And that needing to be taken care of, right? For one, it's so different from what I think our American values are.
I would agree with that. It's the complete opposite.
Yeah, what makes, because I love being American.
Me too.
And so what makes this country so great is that I have the freedom to do whatever I want, right? As long as I don't hurt anybody.
Right.
Right? Like, I have the freedom to do what I want and be great at it if I want to. Right? And that comes within me, right? But of course, with greatness comes struggle.
Yeah.
And then that struggle makes us stronger and it makes us better. right? And then that's what makes America such a great place to be, because I feel like the founding fathers did get their political theory right. I think they got human nature down pretty good.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, to put my family as an example, once again, you know, we come from a communist country where we had no rights, and here we've been able to, you know, my parents are proud small business owners, and we've been able to, you know, get an education, have dream careers, buy properties, live a, you know, quote unquote successful life, where my own country did not give me that. They denied me that. They denied me basic human rights. But here we were able to make all those things happen.
Yeah, like my mom, she's self-employed, right? Like she can do that.
Yeah.
My mom is self-employed, you know, she's her own boss. And then I went to school. I got to study a useless degree, and still I'm employed, like, you know, and then I can make mistakes like that. I can go back and do something else if I want to, right? And it's like the only reason why we have these opportunities are because we run with a capitalist system, not because we run on some socialist system where that freedom wouldn't be there, right? But it's like, what would be the reward, right? Because what are the end goals for the people who want socialism here? They want universal healthcare, right?
Most people come from a good place, right? They don't want anyone to hurt. And I agree with that. I don't want anyone to hurt. But like you said, human nature here is the make it or break it factor for me.
Yeah, because people are going to end up what happens with the Marx theory. The only way to seize the means of production is an authoritative and totalitarian government.
Right.
And that's what these politicians are talking about here, right? So who are like the big probably like the big four, right? So there's this really good book I recommend it to everybody listening. It's called The United States of Socialism by Dinesh D'Souza. Really, really good book. Recommend it to everybody. He talks about the big four, right? And you know, they're pictured here. It's Omar, Warren, AOC, and Bernie Sanders. Like they're like the big four when it comes to like bringing socialism to this country, right? And how are they are they a threat? Is their philosophy a threat? Because AOC, for example, has a huge following. She's extremely, extremely popular.
As does Omar.
As does Omar, and even Bernie Sanders. He got pretty far, you know, in terms of the elections.
Yes.
He obviously didn't win, right? He didn't even win the primaries, but he was he didn't even like win the seat, right? But he went far.
Yes.
For someone who openly says, I am a democratic socialist.
Right.
You know, and it's like, you know, and it's that word socialism, right? Because that word is everywhere, right? The Nazis were socialists, right? And so we're so close to having someone who's openly socialist in the arena of being the leader of the free world. How ironic is that, right? And, you know, so Bernie has a huge following, right? AOC has a tremendous following, right? I see her as like the spearhead. AOC. Right. I see her as like, I mean, she's a millennial, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say that, especially for the younger generations. She's all they know. Yeah. When it comes to this.
She's really popular on Instagram, you know, like on all social media, right? And especially on Twitter. Like she's just this really, really popular person. But what worries me about her is her rhetoric.
Yes.
She sounds exactly like other Latin politicians, but from our native countries. Right. She uses the exact same rhetoric. Yeah. And then that's in the Latin American countries that fight back, right? So like Central America is in constant power struggle for this battle between socialism and their conservatism, right? Right. And it always gets physical, right? It always turns into warfare. So that's why those countries are constant, they're constantly still trying to fight that, right? They're still fighting the Red Scare. Yeah. So, but the politicians there, when they start talking like her, right? So like the package, like the Green New Deal, right? It's like all of that rhetoric that she uses. It's the same rhetoric as these Latin American countries. So she sounds like Chavez. She sounds like Castro, right?
Because none of this stuff is new. None of it. Not. It's not new.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what the people that follow her, the younger generation, they think these are all these new amazing ideas. None of this stuff is new. It's always been there.
And she's recycling it.
Yeah.
She's recycling it and bringing it into the country, right? And then she is she's a very, very good speaker. She's a very good debater. She's a very good litigator, right? And she's very, very young. She has like a whole career ahead of her, right? And more people are following her. So it's like, I guess like to satisfy any...
She has appeal because when we think of politicians, we think of, these older, white, elitist type of people. And she's the complete opposite. She's Hispanic, she's young, she's fun, but that's all she is.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, like she's an interesting person, you know, and it's like she's different, she's the Latin spice,
Right. So she gets attention that maybe she deserves, but the things that she says are definitely questionable.
Yeah, like the Green New Deal, right? It's like it's one of those that has like really good intentions, but it's packed with all this stuff that would just bring down this country the way that these socialist countries, these socialist politicians in Latin American countries brought down their countries too.
Right.
And it's involving government control of the free market, right? And I feel like what we're doing now is much more healthy, right? So the Green New Deal would forcefully stop fossil fuels, right?
Right.
It would take control of...
Sorry.
You're fine. The Green New Deal would forcefully stop fossil fuels, right? So that's literally seizing the means of production, right? So the government would say, no, we're not going to use these anymore, right? We're going to use this clean energy, and we're going to and we all know once the government takes, especially this government, right? I like that America is all about little government because our government's just really bad at things. Every time they try to overtake they overstep their boundaries. We see that they just like suck at everything. So like they're good at some things. They're good at the post office, right? Like I really like that. And education is it's
No.
Yeah, it's like they're there. Healthcare, Obamacare. We can talk about if Obamacare worked or not, right? And so the government kind of sucks at a lot of these things, right? So are they going to be? Do I trust the government taking control of the energy sector?
No.
I like that it's happening naturally, right? So like the competition, like there are entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos that are building the technology in a healthy and free market way, right? And then they're giving us access.
It seems more organic this way.
Florida Power and Light providing solar energy to your homes, right? Shout out to FPL, right? Lower my bill,
please.
I'll get the solar panels. Just lower my bill. So it's happening in a natural, free way, right? As opposed to the government literally forcing its hands on people's businesses, right? And it's completely opposite of what it feels to me. My gut tells me is the right thing that's happening. Now, it's like, is what worries me is that, all right, are they going to throw us into gulags if, let's say, AOC becomes president? Is the government going to throw us into gulags? It's like... Not at first, but it's a slippery slope. Never at first, right?
Yeah, it takes... Yeah, like you say, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, and it's like when we allow the government to do things like that, then we'll get complacent and then we will expect the government to continue in that direction, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's like where I feel the danger is here, right? Because it's starting and there's a mass amount of following support behind these thoughts and these movements, right? So like Bernie's ideas, right? Of like raising taxes, and it's like it's not just gonna be for the rich, right? It's gonna everyone's.
It's never for the rich. No, that's what Castro claimed too when he came into power. The rich are just getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and we're going to take away from the rich. And guess what? He took away from everybody.
Yeah.
The rich, the poor, everyone. No one was exempt from that rule.
Yeah, like when did we start believing politicians? Like what makes them
I don't know, but I really think that we need to start thinking for ourselves again. We need to start valuing the individual, the strength of the human will and spirit, and just stop believing that the government can fix your problems, because they can't.
No, they cannot.
If you can't fix your problems, nobody can fix your problems.
Yeah, no, and it's like personal responsibility
Yeah.
is an important value. It's an important value for us to have, because it's the only way that we can grow as individuals, as people.
And there's a beauty in dealing with the struggle and coming out of it better, and knowing that you made that happen.
Yeah, it's like when they give kids participation trophies. Right? Yeah. They know it's bullshit. We know it's bullshit. And
the kids know it's bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like no one feels happy after
It's okay to be a loser once in a while.
It's necessary.
It's fine. You will survive.
No, like it's necessary, and that's what's going to give you the strength to actually win.
Have a taste for failure.
Yeah,
develop a distaste for it.
What would have happened if the Mighty Ducks have been a good movie if they won since the beginning? No. They had to be losers, and then they rose and they won. That's what makes the human movement valuable.
But this divisive rhetoric that we see through the nation right now, I think that's what's being targeted. And unless we bring it back to the individual and just the power that we hold ourselves. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like that's what makes me think about, like I said, it makes me think about why these socialists here, they refer to countries like Scandinavia, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's like their model, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, let's look at Sweden, right? Everyone wants to live in Sweden. Mm-hmm. And it's like, let's look at Norway. Let's look at all these Scandinavian countries, right? And it's like, you see, they have socialism and it works, right? Well, first we have to talk about what does it mean by work, right? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But there's an interesting, I find that to be a horrible comparison to make, because for one, why does it so for one, there's even questions of whether or not those countries really are socialist, right? They have things like universal healthcare, right? They have like government controlled, they have government controlled markets, right? They're not free markets. But then sometimes politicians from those countries say they're not socialists, right? So even they don't want that title, right? So those politicians are trying to get away from that, right?
Which is very interesting.
Yeah, right? It's like they're doing these things, and then like they have these programs, and
they don't want the label.
They don't want the label, but they're doing it, right? So there's that question: Are they socialists or are they not socialists? And then the other question is like, well, what would happen if we brought those policies to us? Why do they work there and why do they not work here? And I think it wouldn't work here exactly for the reason you're talking about.
Yeah.
This divisiveness. Now those countries, they're like, for one, they don't let people, they're all the same.
I was going to say, those countries, they're a people.
Yeah.
We are the United States of America. We are a patchwork quilt that encompasses every nation that you could think of, every culture that you could think of. They're American. That's, they're part of our government. They're part of our culture. So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, like here you can be black, white, green, blue, orange, and and then you're saying I'm American.
Yeah, I come from Cuba. You come from.
I was born here. My family's Honduran.
Right, that's right. You were born here, but your culture, your family's Honduran.
And we're American.
American.
It's like you can, and then but over there, when you're Scandinavian, you can almost picture it. Oh, what does a Scandinavian look like?
They're a people. They're all part of, and even like to make it even more complex, I'm sure your Honduran background gets expanded even more. My Cuban background encompasses Italian, Spanish, and who the heck knows what else. That's as far as we go. But we're not as simple as just a people. We are a complex group in the United States.
Yeah, and their way of life is just different. I mean, they still live in villages, you know, like they live in like these small villages where they have the local baker and they have like,
Right.
Everyone goes to bed by like 6, like there's the completely different culture.
Yes.
And there are a group of people. Meanwhile, here we're divided, but that's what makes us work, right? Like it's our way of being, right? And, we thrive off of our differences.
Right.
It's
exactly.
like that's what all these inclusion or immersion programs are for, right? Which is a whole other topic, right?
Yes.
But it's like
we'll have that conversation another time.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what they're for, because we thrive off of our differences, right? So it's like, and our differences cause us to compete. And I feel like it's competition in a healthy way, right? But if the government were to seize control here of our free market, I think that would divide us even further in an unhealthy way.
Exactly. That would tip us to the other side that we would not want. So to bring it back to where we started, is socialism a threat to the United States? What do you think? Yes or no?
I think it could be.
Yes. I think it could be. I think it is.
Yeah.
And with that, we're going to let you guys, if you're watching us on YouTube, comment down below. Let us know what you think. How do we further that conversation? Do you agree? Do you disagree? We would love to hear from you. If you're with us on another platform, thank you so much for joining us. You could be anywhere doing anything, and you're here with us. So we're super appreciative.
Yeah. Thank you very much for listening. All right. Stay safe, everybody. Stay blessed.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.